And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I don't know if you had a hard time after the gospel reading saying, the gospel of the Lord, thanks be to God, praise you, Lord Christ. This was a hard text to hear, wasn't it? Let me repeat some of the, along with a little feedback, repeat back some of the key parts of this text. Jesus says, whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. I mean, come on, Jesus, that's a little heavy for 10:30 a.m., don't you think? He goes on later on to say, for those of you who want to be my disciples, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all of your possessions. Now that part we're kind of used to from Jesus, giving up our possessions, perhaps giving to those who need it. But that first part we're not so used to, are we? Hate your family? Turn from them? Hate even your own life itself? I mean, where do you take these words at face value? Take them, as people say, literally? Are we to go and hate our families, our father and our mothers, our children, our spouses, our siblings? Well, if that were the case, then our teenage selves would be doing really well. Those three words a parent hates to hear, and it always kind of comes out, maybe a little sooner for some. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, I hate you. And of course you don't mean it. Of course you don't know what all that is. But is Jesus saying for us to do that? I don't think so. I don't think so. See, in the context of what Jesus is speaking, these crowds, most of these people, if not all of these people, were Jewish people. And he himself was Jewish too. And of course, the family unit was a big deal at that time. Not so much in Roman and Greek culture. The family was a little different. But in Jewish culture, family in some sense was everything. Yes, you had faith, but family was sort of the place where it was rooted. And so for him to perhaps start a new movement, I don't think he thought of himself as doing that, but he saw himself as, of course, preaching the very word that God had given him being God himself. But this new movement that came apart from Judaism, Christianity, it was a big deal to leave your family and to say that you were a Christ follower or a disciple of Jesus. So in that context, he's speaking hyperbolically. That is, he's exaggerating a point. The contrast being, hate your family so much so that you love the cause, that you love the new movement, that you love this faith. It's a turn of phrase. I don't think he literally means to hate. And you can go toe-to-toe with me on that interpretation if you want. And I'd say give that a try for a little while. Go try that at home and see how that works for you. It doesn't work. And if you look at Jesus' own words from Luke's gospel, go back just a few chapters in chapter 6. He says, love those who revile you. Turn the cheek to those who hate you and offer it up as well, the other cheek. We all know love is at the center of Christ's message and the center of who he is. So I don't think he's preaching to be a hater here. I don't think he's saying to turn on your family and turn away. But he's making a very powerful point that first things do have to in fact be first. That our faith is our foundation. And if perhaps that does cause familial strife, then so be it. But he extends these two analogies to us and saying, look, in any other endeavor in life, we take it very seriously. Why is it in faith we take it kind of half-heartedly? I almost used a word at 8 o'clock, half-blanketly, but I did not use that word. Why is it with faith we're kind of half in, half out? He says, look, if you're building a house, you're very serious about it. You're very meticulous about your plans, about your budget, about the spatial needs, about your family's needs. Or in the case of war, a king does not enter into war flippantly. He counts the cost. He considers his troops, the terrain, the environment. In all human endeavors, we plan and we consider and we commit is the big idea here. So he's saying, may it be so too in your faith. May you commit. I think it's all too common, not in this church per se, not in Grace Church, but just in the mainline churches in general and churches at large. We tend to baptize folks, and it's a very serious, solemn affair, and then we just kind of let them go on their own. Again, not here. But it's easy to kind of give the stamp of approval and say, you've been baptized, now go on your way. But that kind of methodology doesn't work with a text like this. It's about giving your all. It's about being committed, being all in. And so instead of baptizing and let him go, it's to teach the faith and to instill the faith and to pattern the faith. He's interested in commitment here, whether it be literally to leave your family, perhaps. I have some friends who are missionaries and they've had to leave their families here in the States to go be wherever they are. Maybe God's calling you to give up your possessions. I don't think that's necessarily the case for you, but it could be. But the point is, whatever God is calling you to do, it's a full commitment. It's a full commitment. And yet that's easy to roll off my lips, isn't it? Just to say that. As if we'd all leave here today and be 100% for God all the time. Give me a break, Jay. I know better than that. I know that for myself. I know as soon as I leave this place, I'm going to have 30 thoughts swarming in my mind as we make our way to vestry and trying my best to do what's best for this church, and yet my commitment falters too. I'm fully human and fully sinful, just like you are. So the gospel message this morning is not so much try harder and commit more and make sure you're Johnny on the spot or Jane on the spot. Actually, the gospel message this morning is, despite our lack of commitment, Christ is fully committed to us. And where we drop the ball, he picks it up and keeps on running. Yes, these words are harsh. Yes, they are serious. But never forget, it's his commitment, not yours, that's foundational. And your commitment and your effort and your faithfulness is all contingent on his. So I want to reframe the discussion a little bit. Not to hate, but knowing that he's making a point here, a rhetorical point. He loved his own mother. He never left Mary. You see Mary at the very end. They're close. And Jesus certainly doesn't kind of preach the nuclear family of 21st century America, but I still think it's important, even if it's not prescriptive, to love our families, to love those that God has entrusted to us. And family's a wide net, isn't it? It doesn't have to be, like I said, the nuclear family. This is your family here this morning, too, by the way. It's bigger than just those in your household. But we know at Jesus' core, that is the message, to love, not to hate. He's just leaning into that Old Testament idiom. That idiom was, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. God doesn't mean that literally, but he means I am loyal to Jacob. And similarly, Jesus is loyal to us. And yes, calls for our loyalty, but that is not where we begin. I think preachers can be the worst at this, putting faith or career above family. I talk about this all the time, and I'm passionate about it, because I love my family. But preachers can be really bad at that and justify it. I'm doing it for the church. I'm doing it for God's cause. But it's not just preachers. We all do it. We choose career sometimes over family. We choose the things that we like to do over family. I want to kind of wrap up and close with a little illustration. Thinking about a snapshot of how God counted the cost fully, knowing that he would take us on and did not abandon us, did not hate us, did not leave us behind. And that becomes a pattern for how we live our lives with our families too, however big or small our family friend circles may be. But a good place where if we had taken this literally and used it to hate our family, could have gone wrong is in the case of a guy named Gene Stallings. You remember Gene, of course. Now this is an Auburn fan talking up here, so this is going to be serious if he's using an Alabama analogy. But Gene had several children, one of which was John Mark, little Johnny. Johnny was born with Down syndrome, if you remember. And if you don't, go Google his story. It's really fantastic. But if Gene Stallings had taken this story literally, to hate your children, Johnny would have had no one. I mean, kids in general wouldn't have anyone, but especially Johnny. And of course, Gene's initial thoughts upon having a child with Down syndrome for him was, maybe I can put him in an institution, just kind of forget about him. He says this in the interview. He thought seriously about this. And he prayed, Lord, change Johnny, make him normal. But Gene says, Johnny never changed, but God changed me because of Johnny. This all came to fore because I was watching the Clemson game and I saw a story about their equipment manager, a guy named David Seville, who also has Down syndrome and serves under Dabo Sweeney. I say Sweeney every time because of the way it's spelled. But the point being here is what culture would say is least desirable, least important, perhaps easily turned away from, using this text, to hate. It's the exact opposite of what Jesus would actually do in these circumstances. And Gene, and in the case of David at Clemson, his parents all say the same thing. This child is not a burden. This child is a revelation of God's love to me. It's not so much about my commitment to the child, but the child's commitment and love back to me. We see a picture and a snapshot of God's love for us in the face perhaps of children, perhaps of Down syndrome children, perhaps in each and every one of us, realizing that God has not abandoned us. He's bringing us along, and He's loved us the full way. And if you watch Gene and how he treated Johnny, Johnny was at every practice. He was at every game, rooting on and cheering and contributing in his own way. I don't use this phrase a lot, but the moral of the story is we don't turn away from the ones God has given us, because God has not turned away from us. So use this literally if you want, but what I'm saying to you is He's not calling for more hate. He's calling for more love, and a more radical love that looks like the kind that Gene and Johnny had for one another, which maybe perhaps is a snapshot of God's love for you and me. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.